So Donald Trump announced that he is sending the National Guard to Washington, D.C., and might be sending them to other cities too. Watch this.
I'm announcing a historic action to rescue our nation's capital from crime, bloodshed, bedlam, and squalor, and worse. This is Liberation Day in D.C., and we're going to take our capital back. We're taking it back. Under the authorities vested in me as the President of the United States, I'm officially invoking Section 740 of the District of Columbia Home Rule Act. You know what that is? And placing the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department under direct federal control, and you'll be meeting the people that will be directly involved with that. Very good people, but they're tough, and they know what's happening, and they've done it before. In addition, I'm deploying the National Guard to help reestablish law, order, and public safety in Washington, D.C., and they're going to be allowed to do their job properly.
Okay, so sending the National Guard to D.C. This is interesting. There's apparently a lot of crime in Washington, D.C. It is not the most crime-riddled city in the country. We're going to get to that. But first, Trump also says he's going to do it in other cities, maybe perhaps the most crime-riddled ones. Here he is.
But then I'm going to look at New York in a little while. Let's do this. Let's do this together. Let's see. It's going to go pretty quickly. And if we need to, we're going to do the same thing in Chicago, which is a disaster. We have a mayor there who's totally incompetent. He's an incompetent man. And we have an incompetent governor there. Pritzker's an incompetent. His family threw him out of the business, and he ran for governor. And now I understand he wants to be president. But I noticed he lost a little weight, so maybe he has a chance. You know, you never know what happens. But Pritzker's a gross incompetent guy, thrown out of the family business. But when I look at Chicago and I look at L.A., if we didn't go to L.A. 3 months ago, L.A. would be burning like the part that didn't burn. If he would have allowed the water to come down, which I told him about in my first term, I said, you're going to have problems. Let it come down. We actually sent in our military to have the water come down into L.A. They still didn't want it to come down after the fires. But that was it. We have it coming down. But hopefully L.A. is watching. That mayor also. The city's burning.
Okay. So this comes on the heels after an attack, and there's a Doge member, if you remember, his name is Big Balls. That's what he would go by. He actually ended up stepping in and being attacked. And this happened. Elon Musk announced that a gang of about a dozen men were trying to assault a woman in her car. Big Balls came to the rescue, which, I mean, he lived up to his name. Got to give the guy some credit there. And he ended up trying to defend her and was severely beaten to the point of a concussion, but he did end up saving her. And then Elon Musk actually called for the federalization of Washington, D.C. So this comes on the heels of that. The question is, how unsafe is Washington, D.C.? Does it actually get us to the point where we need to federalize it, bring in the troops? And we're going to get to some of the criticisms that people have. Some people are saying, look, crime is down in Washington, D.C. We're going to talk about that. Some people are saying, where was Donald Trump when he said that he couldn't send in the National Guard or the troops after January 6th, and now he suddenly can? We're going to break down whether or not there's any truth to that claim as well. Some of the naysayers on this, but let's look at, the positives and the negative of doing this and whether or not it's actually going to work in cleaning up America's cities. He's saying not only Washington, D.C., but other cities in the country. So the homelessness in D.C. and the crime rate, let's talk about that. This comes from the Heritage Foundation. So keep that in mind. This is a very conservative outlet, and these are the types of things they're saying about Washington, D.C. Now, this was written in May of this year, so fairly recent. It says, once in a blue moon, you run across a statistic or record that's mind-boggling. Some are amazing, some are terrible. Well, what they're saying is the disturbing stat is out in Washington, D.C., between 2018 and 2022, only 1.7% of people arrested for carrying a pistol without a license were sentenced to prison. So that is really low in Washington, D.C. That 1.7 is extremely low. They're saying that That is like 97% of the 5,558 adult arrests were actually charged with a firearm without a license. So that is extremely low. They're saying that the Institute for Criminal Justice Reform figures show that 95.8% of homicide suspects in the district are male, 96.8% of those are Black. Over 70% of suspects are are between the ages of 18 and 34 years old. And the victim numbers, 89% are male, 94% are Black. Over 62% of homicide victims are between the ages of 18 and 34. So this crime rate right there is, are we allowed to say Black on Black crime, or is that, I forget the rules. I forget all the rules of like, is that racist, or is that bigoted to say? I don't know what the rules are. I forget them, but clearly it is Black on Black crime, right? And it's male on male crime, and it's 18 to 34-year-olds against 18 to 34-year-olds. So that leads me to believe this is probably a lot of gang violence, and that's what's behind all the statistics. More than half of the homicides in DC are the result of personal disputes, group-related conflicts, that would be gangs, instant disputes, or drug-related disputes, according to the Institute. So that is what they're saying. In 2023, DC had a homicide rate of 40.9 homicides per 100,000 residents and ranked fourth in the worst in the nation, behind only New Orleans, St. Louis, and Detroit. And the homicide rates in the district per 100,000 residents in the year past were 30 in 2022, 34 in 2021, and 29 in 2020. So it was 25 or less in all the previous 8 years, and was as low as 14 as recently in 2012. So they're saying in 2023. So this stat is really important, actually, because the naysayers are going to say crime rates are down in Washington, D.C. But remember these stats, because this is important. So in 2023, the rate is 40.9, but in 2022, it was 30. 2021, it was 34. It was 29 in 2020, 25 or less in the previous years. So it has gone up. In 2023, it was up from 30 to 40. So it went skyrocketing for whatever reason in 2023. So that is important, because the naysayers are right now saying, why are you bringing in all of these federal troops? Because here's CNN. They're saying violent crime is actually down in Washington, D.C. Where's the graphic on this so I can take a look at that? Okay, so the graphic here, 35 down to 26% is what they're saying the violent crime is. Now, this isn't the homicide rate that I was just giving you of 40 per every, what was it, for every 100,000, or 30 for every 100,000. But this is still showing that the rate itself is going down. Okay, but going down from last year to this year, going down from 2023 to this year, the rate was so high in 2023 that it going down is still not, I mean, what does that matter? It was still extremely high in 2023. It skyrocketed. So this is kind of reminding me of Joe Biden, when he's like, I created all these jobs. I came in and I became president, and suddenly there were a ton of jobs after the pandemic. Well, that's because people lost their jobs during the pandemic. So you don't get to take credit for creating jobs when people were just getting their jobs back. And that's kind of what this is. It's saying violent crime rates are down in Washington, D.C. Really? But from what? From skyrocketing rates in 2023. So what is that? That's not telling you things are getting better. Things had just gotten to an all-time, maybe anomalous high. Maybe something had gone on in 2023 that made them insane. And then now they're kind of coming down from this insane all-time high. But the one point is, to the naysayers point, is that DC is not the most violent violent city in the United States. You've got New Orleans, you've got St. Louis, DC is behind them. So what is the urgency of sending in the National Guard to Washington, DC? Things are not, we're not seeing riots and burning and total lawlessness in Washington, DC. We're just seeing an extremely high rate of crime. Most of it is, like I said, Black on Black or gang on gang, young man against young man. This anomaly of this woman being assaulted in her car with a carjacking, which maybe was a gang initiation. I mean, that had been going on in Chicago. There was a big problem with gang initiations in Chicago, where young kids, teenagers, would go around and they'd have to commit carjackings, where they would grab somebody out of their car, shove them out of their car, and steal the car. And that was a gang initiation strategy. So this could have been a gang initiation strategy. Obviously, you have to crack down on that. I'm not saying because it was something that was kind of anomalous and most of the crime is, black young males against other black young males. I'm not saying, oh, so there's no real problem here. Obviously, there's a problem. And obviously, there's got to be a way to crack down on this. And there are solutions to this. I just don't know if it's federalizing DC or bringing in the National Guard. Others also are pointing out that Donald Trump claimed after January 6th that he didn't have the power to deploy the National Guard. So how does he have this power now? That is one of the criticisms we're seeing about this. And that is a little bit unclear and a little tricky. Donald Trump never claimed in any statement that he didn't have the power to deploy the National Guard after January 6th. He claimed that he had made a phone call to do it. The people that were in charge of the National Guard at the Pentagon said they never received that phone call. Then there was the claim that, really, Trump was super vague on that. So the left that is now trying to say, well, you said you couldn't deploy the National Guard and now you are. What's this all about? It's a little vague because Trump never made that claim specifically that he couldn't. He kind of passed the buck on that one. So it was a lot of blame that was put on, for example, Nancy Pelosi, or there was blame that was put on Mike Pence. But in reality, what happened with January 6th, it just seemed like everybody fumbled the ball. It did seem like from the phone conversations, which I believe are understandable, that Trump was before January 6th. This was a few days prior to that event. He was hesitant on sending in the National Guard. There were people that were saying to him, giving him recommendations, you should send in the National Guard. And Trump was like, do I really need that? No one at that point could foresee that the protest was going to get out of control. I don't blame him for not wanting to bring in the troops during a protest. It just doesn't look good. And it doesn't really look good for any protest. Of course, that being said, the right is very quick to send in troops when it comes to a protest against, for example, Israel. So a lot of hypocrisy. I hate all the hypocrisy. Everybody's a hypocrite, left and right. It's just they're hypocrites on different subjects. It's annoying. It's mind-boggling. It's exhausting. And it's kind of makes us feel hopeless about the state of this country and the future of this country. But the criticisms on Trump saying, I didn't have the power to deploy the National Guard. He never actually said that. He just kind of passed the buck. So anyway, that's not a real criticism. We can't really go there with that. Others say this is a distraction. Actually, what is this? We do have a video clip. Let's see. This is Trump saying that Democrats turned down the National Guard. Let's watch that.
January 6th, where I offered Nancy Pelosi and the mayor of D.C. from 10 to 20,000 troops because I thought the crowd was going to be very, very large coming in because I felt it. You could see it. And they turned it down. And if they didn't turn it down, and Kash Patel is a witness, right? I think I can say you're a witness, but we have many other witnesses to that. From 10 to 20,000, they turned it down. And had they not turned it down, you wouldn't have had January 6th as we know it. But the president is not supposed to be sending in it at will.
Okay, so the president's not supposed to be sending them in at will. Okay, so to clarify on that, now that we've listened to that, the claim that Trump made was that, the claims around January 6th were that people were trying to convince him to send in the troops, and he was extremely hesitant, didn't want to do it. He eventually did say, all right, fine, we'll go ahead and send in the troops. But for whatever reason, they weren't sent in. So that is where then the buck gets passed. And but Trump was never firm about it to begin with. He's kind of like, oh, okay, I guess. So maybe people behind the scenes were like, he doesn't really want to do it. It's not a priority right now. It's not like the president's actually ordering these National Guard troops there. He's kind of hesitant on it. So then the buck kind of got passed on that one. And then it was Nancy Pelosi stopped it, or there was a lot of different blaming going on there. So that's neither here nor there. And I don't think that's a legitimate criticism that the left is kind of lobbing at him. But of course, they're going to lob whatever. Others are saying this is a distraction from the Epstein files. Watch this.
We have to understand this, Chris, within the context of Donald Trump's racial politics and within the context of his effort to get Epstein off the front pages. I understand David's point, but when we try to treat this as a rational response, then we lose sight of the actual politics that's being played here. And he's actually trying to give his base red meat to get them off of the Epstein story, and it's on the backs of citizens in Washington, D.C. He's going to undermine the democratic process in the district.
Okay. So a lot of complaints here, a lot of questions. And I think the biggest question to all of this is, what is the goal? So you're sending in the troops. You've got a city that is not crumbling. This city is dangerous, but there's other cities. There's St. Louis, there's New Orleans. If things are so absolutely terrible in Washington, D.C., why aren't we sending in the troops to these other cities as well? Now, Trump says, well, I might do this some other places also. But what is the end goal here? And I think that's the big question. And if we do implement this, what are the consequences of implementing this? So first of all, one thing that people are saying is going to happen, one of the goals is to just remove the homeless. So you're going to go in and you're going to get rid of all of these tent cities. You're going to get rid of all the homeless. Now, I think anybody living in any of these big cities, myself in Los Angeles, having lived there for years and years, the homelessness, this is a serious problem. And it's not one that's lacking sympathy. Those of us that have a lot of sympathy towards homeless people, you start, but at some point you have to have sympathy for the people that are living in these cities and that are paying taxes and paying high rents or high mortgages and living in these, living in a city is expensive in America. And so at some point you have to have sympathy for the people that live there, trying to step over homeless people, avoiding needles on the beach, avoiding human feces or drug deals going on, and they've got children nearby. I mean, there's all of these serious issues that come with homelessness. But, and a lot of people think, well, homelessness are people just down on their luck. And that is not actually the case when it comes to these tent cities in America. There are absolutely homeless people who are down on their luck. They're usually invisible. These are people that are couch surfing with various different family members and friends. They're living in cars. They're kind of going in and out of shelters. But when you're looking at these tent cities, these people are typically either mentally ill or on drugs or both. And that is unsafe for America's cities. It's also, why is it that they're allowed to camp out in public parks that I can't camp out in? I don't feel like I have the right to do that. You can't camp out in. I mean, in Los Angeles, they're camping out all along the beach. I wish I had ocean front property too, but I'm not allowed to do that. So the question is, why are we allowing homeless encampments? What can we do about it? And where do you actually move the people to? So Donald Trump said that he was going to be removing the homelessness encampments. He had said that he's going to give them a place, but that they got to go. And then he says, but all of you criminals, you can stay because we're actually going to round you up and stick you in prison. This is what he tweeted out. So the question is, okay, he says he's going to be rounding up all these homeless people and putting them somewhere else, giving them a place, but far away from the capital. So somewhere outside of the city. But there have been no plans at this point to set that up. So sending in the National Guard right now for 30 days, they're going to be there for 30 days. Where are they going to move all these homeless people within the next 30 days? What is the actual plan besides just rounding them up and moving them so that they set up encampments, maybe away from the nation's Capitol buildings where Donald Trump walks around, where people in politics walk around? I mean, the visual of this, without giving them an actual place that's already set up, this looks kind of like the elitists are just moving the people away and they're going to stick them in other neighborhoods with poor people who are not in positions of political power. And it doesn't really sit well with Americans. I mean, we're paying the taxes, we're paying the salaries for the people in politics. They're in Washington, D.C. They get into political office like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and end up rich and famous in the end, like Nancy Pelosi. And we're all scratching our heads, how is this possible? And now all of them, the elitists, are, holding their noses and wanting to get rid of all homeless people without a plan. And so the plan ultimately will end up being these homeless people just get moved into poor neighborhoods. That's what's going to happen because poor people don't have any political sway. So the question is, what are they going to do with all these homeless people? Now, I'm all about it. Find some place for them to go, set it up. And when you do set it up, make sure that you find, you get mental health treatment in those encampments. And you also get drug addiction treatment for all of these people, because this is not good for the country to have a bunch of people in an absolute mental, just really a health crisis. However you want to slice it, it's a health crisis, whether it be a mental health crisis or a drug addiction health crisis. It's an absolute health crisis. And we in America have enough money to deal with it. And so we should. We should move these people into safe facilities and give them a bunch of resources to try to get them out of this. And maybe that's futile. Maybe they can never be brought out of it. I don't know. But it's worth a shot. I mean, we have to at least try. That's for sure. Okay, so let's talk about El Salvador because this is what this kind of looks like. This is reeling into. Now in El Salvador, it worked great, right? Bukele went in, and suddenly El Salvador went from being one of the most dangerous countries on the planet to being one of the safest. The crime rate dropped, the murder rate dropped like 80%. I mean, it was absolutely astonishing what El Salvador's been able to do. The question is, how have they been able to do it? And would that work here in the United States? And what El Salvador did was they suspended civil liberties in order to accomplish this. Now, there is no doubt that El Salvador absolutely accomplished what people thought was absolutely impossible, which was turning the country from absolute crime riddled, terrible place to be, people fleeing, to being one of the safest places in South America. How did they do it? Well, it didn't come without pain and it didn't come easily. And I think the question is, could we actually do the same thing here in the United States in a way that wouldn't totally disrupt civil liberties? And I'm not sure about that. They had to suspend, for example, freedom of association, arrest without warrant. Military and police were given sweeping powers to detain suspected gang members with little evidence. So you have a tattoo, we think you're a gang member, we're swooping you up and taking you away. That is what they did in El Salvador. And they basically built all of these massive prisons and they incarcerated, I believe, like 2% of their adult population. It was just a massive number of people that they took and put away into detainment centers. If they were to do something like this in the United States, that would look like the federal government declaring a nationwide emergency, which perhaps Donald Trump might do for gang violence specifically. Rights under the First, Fourth, and Fifth Amendment would be partially suspended in order to do that. Police would be able to arrest suspected gang affiliates without probable cause. That is what it would take in order to get this done. So are we comfortable with that? Are we comfortable with police officers just going around and looking at people and saying, you've got a tattoo, we think you might be a gang member, and we're going to swoop you up and throw you in jail, and you're just going to rot there, and we don't care about you anymore? Military patrols would happen in major cities, which is what is happening right now in Washington, D.C., with threats of this happening in other places. In El Salvador, they also had to do mass incarcerations. They did 85,000 or more arrests. 2% of the adult population was imprisoned. Many were detained, have been detained indefinitely without a trial. Also, they've had heavy military presence in gang strongholds. So imagine kind of the inner cities in America being flooded with the National Guard. There were roadblocks, there were house raids, there was random searches and ID checks. You know, you'd have to prove to yourself in El Salvador whether or not you belonged in that neighborhood. You had to show identification. You had to state who you were. And if you were suspicious, you got thrown in jail. That's what happened to you. You got rounded up. They just suspected you were up to no good and they threw you in jail. They also have harsh prison conditions. What they've done in El Salvador is they've mixed all the gang members together, all the rival gang members. They've stuck them all in the same place, and they've just been like this. You're all just getting in there together. That way, the thinking on that, and I'm not sure if it's a bad idea. The thinking on that was this would actually prevent them from kind of creating and operating from prison. If you mix all the gangs, all the rival gangs together, then they don't have the opportunity to kind of coalesce and function while in the prison. You sort of break up the alliances by mixing them all together. Maybe that's a good idea, actually. They built, obviously, mega prisons. They have extremely long sentences for gang members in El Salvador. They've lowered the criminal responsibility age to 12. And they've also, while doing all of this, El Salvador also tried to do some other things in order to prevent gang violence. And that was youth centers and education programs were built in poor neighborhoods or started in poor neighborhoods, but they were small. And they've been small in comparison to the crackdown. So people are saying, okay, let's say we do that here in the United States. I mean, it worked in El Salvador. I mean, it worked. You cannot say it didn't work. It worked. But the question is, what would it cost us here? So we're going to have National Guard patrolling the inner cities. They're going to do, like, some people are calling for the re-implementation of stop and frisk. That is where cops just kind of racially profile or profile somebody they think is a suspected gang member and they're able to stop and frisk them. That was abolished, right? So that was considered racist and that was stopped. We also have in this country, you're not an adult unless you're 18 years old. And if you're under the age of 18, then you kind of you can get away with murder. Although usually with murder, they will try you as an adult if the murder is heinous enough. And, um, maybe if you're like 15 or 16, I think 16 or something, they'll maybe try you as an adult. So the question is, would those tactics work here in the United States? Are they tactics we would want to re-implement here in the United States? Are they against civil liberties to do things like stopping and frisking by just profiling a person and saying, you look like a gang member and that's enough. Like you just look like one. And so we're able to stop you and frisk you. And then if we find something, we can actually throw you in jail. So there's some implications on this, whether or not this would work. Will the National Guard even have that sort of ability? One of the issues, and Janine Pirro, this is what she brings up, and it's a good point, I think, when it comes to the crackdown on violence, because a lot of the violence that's going on it's happening with teenagers. I mean, what I mentioned earlier with Chicago, it was teenagers that were going and doing these carjackings, and sometimes people would get killed. Or in the case of Big Balls, I think that the group that was attacking the woman that he went to kind of rescue, I think it was a group of teenagers. But here's Janine Pirro talking about just that and maybe lowering the age of responsibility from 18 to lower than that. Watch this.
But what I can tell you is this. I see too much violent crime being committed by young punks who think that they can get together in gangs and crews and beat the hell out of you or anyone else. They don't care where they are. They can be in DuPont Circle, but they know that we can't touch them. Why? Because the laws are weak. I can't touch you if you're 14, 15, 16, 17 years old and you have a gun. I convict someone of shooting another person with an illegal gun on a public bus in the chest, intent to kill. I convict him. And you know what the judge gives him? Probation. Says you should go to college. We need to go after the DC Council and their absurd laws. We need to get rid of this concept of, no cash bail. We need to recognize that the people who matter are the law-abiding citizens, and it starts today. But it's not going to end today, because the president is going to do everything we need to do to make sure that these emboldened criminals understand we see you, we're watching you, and we're going to change the law to catch you. And my final note is this. These kids understand that the jurisdiction is through the State Attorney General, Brian Schwab. I did a poster of the young man from Doge who was beaten bloody with a severe concussion, a broken nose. And then I did a poster of what happens to those kids, because I can't arrest them, I can't prosecute them. They go to family court and they get to do yoga and arts and crafts. Enough. It changes today. Thank you, Mr. President.
I can't say I disagree with her, except on the point of the no cash bail. I don't think we should have a bail system that is determined on whether or not you're wealthy and you can afford an attorney that's going to help you get out. Just don't let them out. I mean, if they're accused of, I don't know. I haven't done enough research on that particular topic to really go in depth on that. I just know that I don't like the idea that rich people can get out and poor people cannot. Let's just make it based on the crime itself and maybe some other factors or whatever. But the rest of her points, I think, are really good ones, which is, obviously, I'm not sure what the National Guard going in for 30 days is going to do in Washington, D.C., except, just it's like for looks. I mean, it's just to make you realize we're doing something about this now. And yeah, there's going to be more eyes on the street. So maybe there would be fewer crimes committed because people are worried. Because if you've got a guy with a machine gun on every corner, if you've got a group of military soldiers that are armed and I'm not sure if they're going to be armed or what the plan is for them, but if they're going to, I mean, that's obviously intimidating. And so maybe there would be actually less crime just by virtue of a ton of National Guard patrolling the Washington, D.C. streets. But that's obviously not sustainable. And what I think Janine Pirro is talking about is more sustainable. You have to change the laws. I mean, ultimately, that's what it boils down to. You have to change the laws and make them harsher. We cannot be allowing teenagers to just get away with murder, get away with beating people, get away with these things, getting away with stuff. The whole idea of teenagers going to family court and not facing crimes as an adult is the thinking that, well, when you're young and stupid, what do you know? You're making bad decisions. You're maybe heavily influenced by adults around you. And so you, you shouldn't be held as responsible. The problem with that is now the adults around them are using them, the young kids, to do all of the bad crimes because they know that they can get away with it. So the young kids are also knowing they can get away with it. The older criminals are thinking, we know you can get away with it. So we're going to use you to do all of this bad, terrible crime. And if you want to be in our gang, then you got to do it. And don't worry, you're not going to face any consequences. So maybe if we did actually lower the age and say, look, if you're 14 and above, you're going to be tried as an adult. There's no, and you're going to go to jail. You're not going to be getting out when you're 18 years old. I'm not sure. I mean, that's really unfortunate to throw a young, when I think about it, do I really think a 14-year-old should be going off to prison? Maybe it's a special prison, but nonetheless and then they get transferred to adult prison when they're 18 or something. Do I think it's fair when their minds are so malleable and they're so easily influenced? But then I think maybe their parents would actually be around a bit more if they realized, look, your kid, if they get sucked into a gang by the time they're 14 and they commit carjackings and beatings and they're doing these flash mob raids at the mall and they're going to actually face serious consequences, you might, as an adult and a parent, you might actually pay a little bit more attention to what the hell your kid is doing on the side. Maybe you'd actually call up your pastors and ask for more community youth-based programs, a place for your kid to go after school that is safe and not riddled in gangs. I mean, you might actually step up and parent more. So maybe that responsibility needs, and maybe we should start prosecuting the parents. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to be like a heavy authoritarian on this or anything, but at the same time, this is a genuine problem that has to be corrected. And I'm not sure if, obviously, it's not that I'm not sure. I'm sure that whatever we're doing, it's not working. So we have to do something different. I don't know if going the Bukele way of El Salvador is exactly the right way to do it either. Maybe there's somewhere in between where we can still hold on to our civil liberties and our our standards and our beliefs as Americans in a free democracy. With the belief that we're in a free democracy, that's under question. I understand that, but maybe there's something in between there. But certainly being tougher on crime might be the answer. A lot of liberals for many years have said being tough on crime is racist. Well, we've tried it their way. And maybe we need to try it the other group's way, which is going back to being maybe tougher on crime. Maybe that'll work. Maybe there's something in between. But I'm not, again, the end takeaway on this is I'm not 100% certain what the end result will be sending in the National Guard besides just we're going to do something. It's just a show of we're going to do something. But what is it you're going to do with the National Guard? I think that's the big question. And that continues to be the big question on this. Hey guys, thank you for watching this clip from the full Kim Iverson Show, which you could check out Monday through Friday, 5 p.m. Eastern at KimIversonShow.com. See you there.